Good morning, everyone. This is Mortgage Pros 411. I'm Audrey Boissonou with my co-host Kevin Casey, and today we are joined by Diego Sanchez. So he is a UFC fighter. Oh, wait, no. In Colombia. Oh, wait, he's president of Housing Wire. That's it.
That's
That's
the
Oh,
one.
that Diego
yeah.
girl.
When they run your credit, Diego, do they mix you up with a UFC fighter?
I might be a nightmare, but I'm not that nightmare.
Is that his catchphrase?
That is tagline.
That is funny. That is really
He's a
funny.
good fighter. Very good fighter.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, I'm glad you're here today. So this week is Jobs Week, but weirdly, we don't have JOLTS until next week. Usually we have JOLTS today, ADP tomorrow, and then we have BLS on Friday. But no, they've moved JOLTS to next week. No explanation why, or I don't know it. So,
So they
Mark,
can come up with better numbers.
they're expecting 140,000 job creations from ADP tomorrow. We'll also have mortgage applications in the Fed's Beige Book, so you got that to look forward to. Thursday, we have jobless claims as usual, and Friday, we have BLS. They are expecting 153,000 job creations and for unemployment to stay at 4%. However, we know that that number is wildly unpredictable and usually very flawed. So it'll move the market, though, potentially. So get ready for that. This morning it was interesting because the 10-year treasury, which has been taking it has been on a downward trajectory. We're at 4.15. And then when I looked right before we came on, we were at 4.19. So I don't know what the heck has happened in the last hour. Do you, Diego?
Tariffs.
I mean, it's just so volatile that the trying to figure out what's happening in the bond market that's especially intraday. I think that's pretty tough.
Yeah, it is. Well, we did have this little thing that happened overnight. So we have tariffs now, big ones, not little ones, big ones with Canada, 25% with Canada and Mexico, 20% with China. So I was listening to a commentary on this, and they were pointing out that it's not that bad potentially because not everything that goes into what we need is from Canada or Mexico. And, the dollar's up 6% since September. So that's supposed to offset it, which I guess, has some validity. But regardless, I think any way you cut it, a 25% tariff with a country that provides a third of our lumber is a fairly significant hit.
Housing expense.
So, thoughts, Diego?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about tariffs. And what concerns me the most about this is China and Canada have had years to figure out where we will hurt the most when they come back at us. And so they started to come back at us earlier today, but I don't think that that's done. And so you mentioned lumber. There are going to be other ways that they retaliate in this now trade war that are really going to hurt. And I'm just not super clear on the strategy for our economy, right? It feels to me like we are um, creating some self-inflicted wounds here that just didn't need to happen. My concern is that that the retaliation started today, but that it could get worse over the next couple of weeks. And then, we'll come back with stuff, they'll come back with stuff, and they're going to be very smart and they're going to make it as painful as possible for us. So I don't understand what the end game is here. And I get pretty itchy when I can't see the strategy. So that's my big concern, is that we are inflicting unnecessary pain on our economy and on our consumers, on us, essentially.
Well, a month ago, weren't we told that this was a strategy to get them to beef up our border, their military along the border, and help control who's coming into the United States? And today, I'm not hearing anything about that, so maybe I missed it, but it is, to say the least, worrisome. I read that NAHB had sent a letter to President Trump asking for a carve out in the tariffs for building materials and things related to construction and housing. Have you heard an update on that at all?
I haven't heard an update, but it is not. I think we'll be seeing a lot of letters like that from a lot of different industries who are going to want a carve out, and who don't really understand what the strategy is for their industry right now. Um, so, like taking a step back a little bit, I'm not totally opposed to tariffs, or even to a trade war, when we have a very tough competitor in China. It might make sense, in order to get the right deal with China on the table, to be going back and forth a little bit on things. I don't know if it makes sense to negotiate on Twitter and on other social media. I think that you save negotiations for the negotiating room, but it might make sense to pursue a conversation with them about a better deal. So that that there could be a strategy there. I just don't get it when it comes to Canada and Mexico and a lot of our European allies. I- Why would we want to tick them off? It just
Why piss your friends off?
What's that?
Why piss your friends off?
Yeah, I don't get that, and especially when it will have such an impact on housing, which has been really, as we all know, struggling for a couple of years. One of the only bright spots in the housing market over the last couple of years have been the home builders, new homes, and the ability of home builders to pay down rates, has been one standout, one silver lining in a pretty dismal housing market over the past couple of years. And now what we're doing is, maybe we'll see some lower interest rates from all of this, maybe, and lower mortgage rates over time. But I don't know if that brings back the existing home sales, and we're dinging new home sales in the process. So I just, I got to figure out what the strategy is. I haven't figured it out yet.
Well, and whether they're, yeah, this all had to be plotted out ahead of time. Like, there's no way that you come in on January 20th and just come up with all these ideas in a session, where all at once. This had to be mapped out. So I'm hoping there is a strategy, and I'm hoping there is some sort of in game that we can't see, but it exists, and it will all fall into place and miraculously be fine. So, and again, if you're hoping for anything other than total success on this, don't do that, because we need for our country to be strong and our economy to do well. So I am hopeful that things will come out for the good. Can you see me measuring my words very carefully? But with that,
Yeah, I didn't.
it is a little, I mean, it doesn't feel great right now. We're on March 4th. I can't believe it is March 4th, 2025. Did you see Chrisman this morning? Rob Chrisman's. He said March 4th is the only date that is a command. March 4th. Get it? I don't know why I thought that was funny. Anyway, we are part of the Chrisman commentary group. So, our Chrisman media group, but I just thought that was hilarious. But we're at March 4th. It's January 20th was when the executive orders started flying. And so much has happened in such a tiny, tiny amount of time that it's just astounding. So again, I think we all need to be hoping there's some sense in all this, but I don't see it either yet. So we'll see. And then it's interesting when you start listening to Scott Bessent, our new Treasury Secretary, who is a smart guy. He seems to understand housing. He seems to understand how it all works together. He has run a very, very successful hedge fund. And, he doesn't, but he's very optimistic. I mean, extremely optimistic about how everything's going to come out sunshine and roses. So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems to me that his strategy is focused on how can we cool off the economy, and work these interest rates lower, right? Without creating too much pain for the American consumer. And so I think what we've been seeing is, maybe even pushing us into a slight recession, with the ultimate goal of, hey, like we're going to have much lower interest rates, and that will unlock the housing market, that will unlock other investment, and it's an interesting strategy. It's a really bold strategy, and I watched him the other day. I forget what show was on, and he was saying that they're really not going to own this economy for another 6 or 12 months. And so, I think that's just that thinking is sort of part of the strategy. Like maybe if times are tough for a couple of months right now, and we can get lower interest rates out of it, maybe people won't blame Trump and Trump's team for that recession, but they'll be happy with the lower interest rates that come out on the other side. I think it's a really interesting strategy. I don't know if it's going to work. It'll be really interesting to follow Trump's approval ratings over the next couple of months, because I do think that we are heading into a recession now, and I think a lot of the data points in that direction. So does Trump and Bessent and the rest of Trump's economic team get blamed for a recession that starts, 2 or 3 months into the second term? I don't know the answer to that. It'll be really interesting to watch how the country responds to that kind of like very quick recession, in terms of the overall length of time in the term. So I'll just be keeping a close eye on those approval ratings and overall consumer confidence as we go through this.
Well, I think that we always have to remember that the economy is so cyclical that you don't affect a recession within weeks or even probably months, right?
I don't know. I
Right?
mean,
Like, isn't this
it's
gonna take time, and
it's
they don't
it's
know you're in a recession until you're already like out of it half the time? Like,
so I would encourage people to look at the GDP Now data that just came out. I believe it was yesterday, and the Atlanta Fed has this GDP Now tracker that looks at all sorts of data and responds to that data and talks to economists and sort of figures out like what's happening to GDP right now, based on what just happened today and over the past week. And that GDP Now tracker has gone from, I believe it was like 2.3 or 2.4% to the positive to 2.8% to the negative in just a couple of weeks. And what they're responding to the trade wars and some of the other economic readings that have happened just over the past week, including job loss claims that spiked a little bit last week. And I think the expectation that they're going to keep spiking this week because of so much austerity that's happening in DC. So I don't know. This might be happening pretty quickly, and I don't really see other external shocks to the economy beyond what's been happening with the tit for tat in the trade wars, beyond what's happening with the Department of Governmental Efficiency led by Elon Musk, and so it might be that we get pushed into a recession pretty quickly here. It seems like.
right. I'm really glad you said that, because to your point, the Atlanta Fed, a week ago, they said that they were revising their estimate from 2.3 in the pot to the positive for GDP down to 1.5%. And now they're already at 2.8%. You're right. I mean, you could be dead on this.
It's just a really, it's just a very wild swing that has no external shock about, to the economy attached to it. So it seems to be playing off of stuff that's just been happening over the past month or so around these escalating trade wars and some of the inflationary policy and the government austerity that's been happening in DC with Doge.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be a wild ride no matter which way we cut it, I think. And I find it, again, we were talking about how this month, I think we've been doing the show for 5 years and 51 weeks a year for 5 years. We've seen a lot of different projections and ups and downs and sideways and all sorts of crazy, right? But one of the things that has become super clear is you can make all these projections about what's going to happen in, even a month or 3 months or in a year or whatever. And it goes flying out the door just because some event comes out of left field.
Something else happens.
Coming. So, all of a sudden there's this, debt ceiling crisis or a bank failure, or some country invades some other country and impacts everything. So again, we're looking at okay, what do we have to expect this year? And I think we have a lot of just put our heads down, figure out how to be as educated as possible with what's going on now and what we are thinking might happen, but making sure we're really clear that we don't know. Bottom line is nobody knows what it will look like in 3 months or 6 months. It's anyone's guess, but people still need a place to live.
I think that's 100% true. And we as individual housing professionals don't have a lot of impact, or really any impact, over what's going to happen with mortgage rates. I think it's good to stay close to them and to understand, what are the triggers that might move them up or down. I think it's good to stay close to the evolving strategy of the Trump administration, and where they're trying to go in terms of lowering those long-term interest rates. I think those are really important things to understand, but they're not going to impact you're not going to have an impact over them, right? But what you do have an impact over is your ability to be really smart about your local market, and what's happening in your local market with inventory, with demand, with home prices, and all the nitty gritty of housing market data in your local area. So you can be that local expert and help your sphere, respond to, what's happening. And what's happening is changing on a daily basis. It's pretty chaotic, but the LO or the real estate agent, for that matter, can kind of rise above the chaos and be a really strong advisor. And there are going to be some really good opportunities to buy real estate. There is in every market, right? But I think over the next couple of years, it's going to be really interesting, and it will really depend on what's happening locally. And so I think making sure that you're really smart on what's happening day to day and week to week in your local housing market can kind of put you above that chaos a little bit and make you a really good advisor to your clients.
I had a really interesting conversation yesterday with a financial advisor, and we both kind of came to the realization that real estate is one of the best inflation hedges out there. And so people should be looking to, acquire real estate, investment property if they can, even second homes, just because it's the one really true star that shines when the inflation kicks in.
Well, and by the way, people need a place to live. We're building 1.2 million units a year on average, and we have 1.9 million household formations. So do the math, kids. It's that simple. And then if you look at Dr. Leune, he just noted, he's the chief economist for NAR, National Association of Realtors. He said that they updated the median net worth of homeowners. And in 2022, the median net worth of homeowners was $396,200. In 2024, it was $415,000. And the average net worth of renters did not change from $10,000 in 2022 to $10,000 in 2023. And Diego and I were talking about this earlier, that, most people, I think it's fair to say most, can generalize a little bit here, don't have the wherewithal to save and invest as much as they're going to need to for their future and their retirement potentially. So it is something that really hedges against all that and is worth noting. We also had a bunch of comments. Thanks, guys.
The bunch is short. You're understating it with just a bunch. The comments are blowing up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Start at the top. So first of all, we love this. second of all, so first of all, okay, whatever, first, second, I don't know, whatever it is of all. Lilia said he has an issue, President Trump, with every country that the US has a trade deficit with. We have a trade deficit with Canada, Mexico, and China. That's fair. I mean, that is fair. And there are some of the things about some of the things that are happening that do make sense, right? So the idea that there is a huge tariff on cars coming from Germany, but we don't do it back to them. I mean, that kind of thing, I get it. Totally get it. Tony did not appreciate my comments at all, it would appear. And Tony and I go way back, so he can, I was going to say something really obnoxious. I'll behave. Anyway, so it is, there's so much all the time going on. So then we get, so GDP, oil, weirdly, I did not know this because you can't tell from going to get gas at my gas station. So oil is down to $67 a barrel from $80 a barrel in January.
Really?
Yeah, right.
Well, that's because you buy your oil from in California. And
Okay.
we are the sole state that doesn't know how to buy cheap oil. We buy it the most expensive stuff.
Well, considering how much I pay.
Because the most expensive stuff is the best stuff, right?
Yeah, but anyway, OPEC has indicated that they are going to increase their oil production, which is and it's not just like all at once. It's going to be over time in the future, which should help a little bit with easing oil prices, which does trickle down to the consumer's pocketbook. Not mine. Again, my gas station seems to be some aberration. I don't know what everyone else is seeing across the country, but when they're saying, "Oh, well, it'd be really great if the average oil price or gas price was $3.30 a gallon or whatever it was." Yeah, if it went down to 3, that'd be great. And I'm thinking, I'd be thrilled if I was at under 5, you know? So anyway, yeah.
The issue there, I think lower oil prices are welcome, but we have to remember that oil companies are not charities. And so they are going to look at supply and demand and respond accordingly. And so, we can try to jawbone them all day long, and Trump can try to use the bully pulpit to drive oil prices down. It's really just supply and demand and market economics at the end of the day. And so I don't know how much long-term impact that can really have. And then, you run into the issue of trade wars again, right? Like there are oil producing nations that are part of, these escalating trade wars, and they could decide, hey, we're just not going to export oil to you anymore. We know you're a real oil-driven economy. So I don't know if you can rely on, long-term price increases. And you also have to think about oil. It's not a limitless resource, right? There is a limit to the amount of oil there is in the world. And so it's just really unlikely that over time, a limited resource will have, decreasing or low prices, right? Like they're gonna go up over time because it
That's
diminishes.
just going to go away.
Yeah, it's going to go away. So, yeah, as a strategy, I'm not sure it makes a ton of sense to rely on low long-term oil prices. But they're welcome in the short term for sure.
So Peter had a comment. He said, success for a hedge fund manager probably looks different than success for a loan originator, which probably looks different than success for a consumer. And I think that is so valid. I mean, so valid. So yeah. We have more egg. We have talked more about eggs in the last few months, Diego. I mean, it is
they're really expensive. I like, what else can you say? Like, they are really expensive.
I paid $14.99 for a dozen jumbo eggs the other day.
The other one that's really wild, and we drink a lot of coffee in my house. Coffee has gone nuts. And I don't know exactly how it relates to the egg issue. It probably doesn't, or maybe it does. But like that's also gotten really expensive.
And probably orange juice also.
Yeah.
People just stop drinking orange juice.
I have a client who's a coffee buyer for a major coffee shop chain, and she's been talking. I mean, it sounds like there was some disease in some place, and there was this problem. They're having supply chain issues. Like it is a multifaceted issue. But I do believe that I read that coffee was like what $6 a pound or whatever. I'm like, how in the hell does that translate into a $7, $8 cup of coffee, for God's sake? It's so crazy. So
Yeah.
yeah. So they were where do we go next, kids? Where do
And we wanted to talk about ideas of different tax changes that are coming out and being thrown around. Like
You mean
someone
the
was talking about
property
the idea of
tax?
the property tax elimination.
Did you see this, Diego?
The elimination of potential elimination of property tax in Florida. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
I did see that. Yeah, we wrote an article about it at Housing Wire, and it was by far the top read article for several days.
Oh, wow.
As you can imagine. And it's a very interesting proposal. Coming out of Florida. And the challenge is how do you pay for stuff, right? So you got to pay for stuff somehow. We want to send our kids to school. We want to have good police and fire protection. We want a lot of things.
Yeah, you want the ambulance to show up when you have the heart attack.
We want a lot of things that can't really be provided in a lot of cases by private companies. And so how do we meet the needs and like fulfill our end of our social contract with our kids and our social contract with our senior citizens, our parents and our grandparents, without taking in any revenue. You can't, right? So you basically have to shift that tax burden somewhere else. And so the question is, where do you shift it? And it's the same with the tax cuts that are being considered at the national level. I would love to pay less in taxes. I think everybody would.
Right.
But we have sort of societal commitments when it comes to like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, our national defense.
Yep.
Educating our kids. There are a lot of things that we want to do as a country that just can't be fulfilled necessarily by private companies. And so you got to make the math work, right? Like one of the reasons that I think Trump was elected is, people were really frustrated with exploding budget deficits and with runaway inflation that happened in 22 and 23. But if you cut off revenue sources and you don't cut expenses enough, you're running into the same problem. Like you're still going to explode the deficit. So, I think these are interesting proposals and these are conversations that we should be having. Like, what is the best way to tax? Because I think we all agree that we want to have these basic services and this basic social contract. So how do we fund it, right? So I think it's good to talk about it. But ultimately, I think it's going to be pretty tough to get rid of property taxes because I think they provide most of the funding for the schools in Florida and a lot of other local and state services. And I just don't know how you replace that in a meaningful way.
Well, and again, my hope is that we figure out how we're going to replace that income before we cut off that funding source. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I was just up in Portland 2 weeks ago, and they had so Oregon has no sales tax, and state of Washington has no income tax. So the people that try to avoid taxes like crazy live right on the border, and they buy all their stuff in Oregon, and then they don't pay property taxes. Okay, but what they don't realize is that they have really, really hefty probate taxes. So don't die there. It's actually enough. California is one of the cheaper states to die in for your heirs. And it's like just, but so you have to choose your state as to which tax you want to pay or not pay.
So I lived in Oregon for a number of years. My dad still lives there, and the property taxes there are very high. I mean, so again, there's going to be an offset somewhere. And even if you don't own a home, just remember that as a renter, you are helping to pay somebody else's property taxes. So it doesn't not affect you. It'll be I'm very fascinated to just watch this play itself out and see where we land. And again, I am, you know,
Yeah.
crossing my fingers. Meanwhile, it's been interesting watching the inflation numbers. So PCE came out last Friday for January. There were revisions to the previous month. The um, December was revised up, which made these numbers look less good, but they were still okay. So there were, they still, shelter is still not reporting, well, I would say accurately, the shelter numbers within PCE and these other inflation gauges
Are too they're too high. They're higher than they actually are. Yeah.
pretty high. We've got apartment lists who just came out and, you know, new rent. This is new rents. This is not blended rents or renewal rents. This is just new rents. It was up 0.3 month over month, but it was down 0.4 year over year, 6.9% vacancy rate, and it's been negative. New rents have been negative since the second half of 2022. So, but still, when you look at PCE, shelter is way off on their. So I don't understand, like, why can't they fix that, Diego? Do you know?
I think that so the PCE does look at shelter a little bit differently than CPI, and PC the PCE is the Fed's sort of
Maybe.
preferred
Favorite
inflation
measure
reading.
of inflation.
So I suspect that they are when they think about this, they are taking that into account that it is a lagging indicator a little bit, and that things are a little bit better on that side than they maybe appear to be. I think that they are still going to be cautious about the Trump economy for a couple of reasons, and actually. Chairman Powell, sort of hinted at these in his last press conference when he said they were basically taking a waiting to see attitude about inflation because they were looking at specific trade and other inflationary policy to basically make an assessment like, is this going to drive up inflation? And so, I think the way they're thinking about it is, okay, trade wars, that's definitely not good for inflation, right? Costs are going to go up. And it may not be like a one-time increase because when you have a tit for tat, when you have an actual war, you're kind of going back and forth with accelerated increases on different things. So it's not a one-time hit. It could be a multiple time hit to inflation. So that's one issue. The Fed also said that they were looking at immigration policies, and there was actually a question about mass deportations and whether that is causing potential labor costs to spike. And they said they weren't seeing that yet in the data, but they were keeping an eye on it, right? So if you do mass deportations, you are decreasing the labor supply, especially in industries like home building, like food processing, like agriculture, which contribute a lot to, prices in those industries contribute a lot to whether we have inflation or not. So I think that's another thing that they're looking at. And then, of course, they're looking at the tax cuts, right? Like we all know Trump wants to do big tax cuts. Republicans in Congress want to do big tax cuts. How are they going to pay for it? Right? Or are they just going to do what they did in the first Trump term? They're going to have unpaid for tax cuts, which explode the deficit, and that's inflationary, right? So I am cautious. I'm sort of like cautiously pessimistic about inflation, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, I don't know if all of these things are going to drive up inflation a lot. I suspect they might, though. And so one of the worries that I have, when you pair it with, we do seem to be heading into a recessionary environment. When you pair inflationary pressures from these different policies with recession, that's not a good environment. And I think somebody in the comments mentioned stagflation. We don't want stagflation. That's a bad scenario for everybody. And so, but I'm worried about it because a lot of these policies could contribute to both a recession, but also to inflationary pressures. And if you have enough inflationary pressure, it gets really hard for the Fed to ease their rates as much as they would probably want to ease their rates when we're in a recession. So, I think it's an area that people should stay smart on, like stay focused on what's happening with inflation month to month. Look at the CPI, look at the PCE, understand why the Fed prefers the PCE, and think about all these policies in relation to how it's going to impact the economy and how it's going to impact pricing pressures.
So when we first started hearing the recession conversation, was that in the summer of 22 or 21? It was 22, right? And
Yeah, so we have an analyst at Housing Wire, Logan Mohtashami, and if people don't follow him, I highly recommend that they do. I'll go back and confirm. He has a model called the 7 red flag recession model, and I think you're right that he raised his 7th red flag, midway through 2022. But I'll go back and look and confirm that. But yeah, so there's been a recession watch for a good stretch of time. So yeah,
we got I was in the shower one day and where my best thinking happened. Sadly, I can never remember what the hell I was thinking when I was in the shower when I get out. But anyway, I remembered this, which was I was so sick of talking about recession. I told Kevin that we were going to make it into a drinking game. So every single time we said the recession word, we were going to have to take a shot during the show. And then we realized that at that point we would be on the floor by the time we were at the end, and that wouldn't work out. But that talk kind of went away for a while, and now it's back. And so I find that really interesting. And also the idea of stagflation, which nobody was really talking about before. And just to remind everyone what that means is stagflation is when you have high inflation, stagnant economy, and elevated unemployment. So if you're in which, I could see that happening.
It's very difficult to get out of that.
And it's not good. So
the last time it happened, I think in a meaningful way was in the 70s. And it was rough. I think that what ended up happening is
Diego, do you remember how rough it was? Were you alive then?
when I was 2 or 3 years old.
I remember it.
I was challenged by it. No, but seriously, there was the whole thing with Paul Volcker coming in and ramping up the Fed funds rate to like 17 or 18% to finally kill off the inflation part of it. But like that only extended a pretty deep recession. So it's kind of hard to get into and hard to get out of. It's not a place that we want to be.
No, not at all. So it's interesting though, when you start looking at the graphs of the annual appreciation for the past literally 83 years. I mean, out of 83 years, there's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years we haven't had appreciation. And most of those were during the meltdown, which Jill is pointing out in the comments that every time somebody says the Great Recession, I bristle and say there was nothing great about it. Can we just, call it the nightmare? We can call it, pick some other name. But anyway, even other than recessions that we cause as an industry, and I say we, meaning Wall Street and a bunch of greedy people, wherever they might have been, housing has done well in recessions overall. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. Now, again, stagflation could be a whole nother animal, right?
But even in the 70s, homes appreciated in the 80s.
Yes, they did big time. And
homes are always a great investment.
Yeah.
Get a place to live.
Yeah.
Okay, so we want to have a quick moment to caution folks because Kevin's son forwarded him this recording from, I don't know, some person on.
Oh, we should I pull it up.
Kevin, and again, be careful of who you're listening to. If you're going to one source for your information, rethink your strategy and check multiple sources to make sure you're dead on. And I made Kevin promise that he wasn't going to play this thing because we don't need to give this guy more visibility than he already has. But tell them about what this thing says, Kevin.
The guy was saying, just came out now. what's defaults or defaulting mortgages are at the highest level since 2008. And he was just going on and on about this stuff. I'm like, this is not happening. Like, we are at the lowest levels. It's like, during 2008, the default rate was something like 8.5%. We're at what, 1.7 now, something like that.
Oh, we're below that.
the-
No,
the,
our
uh,
last came out and our 90 days plus are at 1%. That's the same as last year. Foreclosures have gone from 0.3 to 0.2, which is multi-decades lows. I mean, and according to ICE data, which is credible, we had there was an increase in overall delinquencies, but it was mostly because they took away the VA moratorium on foreclosures. So VA is really where that was because those delinquencies went anyway. So it's everything performing.
Gloom and doom sells. That's why people do this crap. Really, it's crap. There's a lot of it on YouTube. And you should really check your sources. So yeah, I mean, foreclosures and defaults, all-time lows. American homeowner is in great shape.
Yeah.
Like great shape with really high quality mortgages. Like there's none of the, no income, no asset type nonsense that we did during the Great Recession. And so, and the credit profile of the American homeowner is really, it's like sterling. It is so good. And a lot of them have mortgage rates that are below 4%, and a bunch of them have them below 3%, right? So like, a lot of that stuff is just nonsense. And like Audrey said, check your sources. Again, I'll point back to Logan Motoshami, who sort of has it's like a passion point of his to debunk these myths. And so, he's called them the housing bubble boys, the foreclosure crash bros, and a bunch of other terms that just point out like, and point out with the data. Like, let's just go back to the data. The data is really good for the American homeowner.
It is. I mean, the average loan to value, I haven't looked recently, but it was like 46% average LTV in America. And somebody said also make sure that when you're looking at foreclosure stats or any sort of delinquency data, compare HUD to HUD, so compare FHA to FHA, VA to VA. Don't mix them up and think, oh, well, there's something missing from here.
And primary residence to commercial, totally different.
Well, and I think the commercial conversation is going to be interesting and looking forward because not only is the federal government ordering their employees back to work, but so is like the state of California is requiring that all state employees be in the office 4 days a week.
A lot of big companies are doing it. Yeah.
Companies are doing, I think that we're going to see, and every once in a while I get something right. I called this from the very beginning. I'm like, I do not see how this is sustainable and it's going to last. And yes, I know there's some convenience to it, but is it really best overall? I mean,
yeah. And this is another place where people can be smart about their local housing market, right? So during the pandemic, there were a lot of pandemic boomtowns where people would leave, California for Idaho or Texas. People would leave New York for Florida. But if you look at what's been happening over the past year or so, which is where we're seeing some of the reversal of this pandemic migration, I think part of that is people are getting called back to office. And that means you've got to move back to to wherever your office is. And so one of the interesting things that we're seeing, there's not really a national housing market. Like it's different state by state, and really you got to drill down to the city and even to the zip code in some places. But we are seeing those pandemic boom towns with rising inventory, and they're becoming much more buyers markets. Whereas the places that people were leaving, back in 2021 and 2022, have very little inventory and are still sellers markets.
Mhm.
So, Audrey, I think that's spot on. And if you dig into the data in the Mid-Atlantic region and the areas around DC, you are going to see that return to office. You're also going to see people getting laid off, right? So it'll just be really interesting to watch what's happening with inventory as people go back to the office 5 days a week, but also what's happening as people leave the workforce in those areas.
It is definitely going to, again, I think that's really the overarching theme is it's going to be interesting. I mean, you,
Totally.
I don't understand, like in our business, you don't need to gamble. You don't need to there is enough excitement and risk and all sorts of
Mhm.
crazy going on every single week.
Every day,
I mean, it is
an
amazing.
adventure.
It is.
So I joined Housing Wire almost 7 years ago, and I actually come from I come from a media background, but business to consumer media. So I was in like men's health and women's health, healthy lifestyle brands. I worked for a travel publisher. I worked for MSN, and when I went to business media and specifically housing with Housing Wire, I was like, oh, is that going to be boring? Like, business media. Like I've been doing this sexy business to consumer media for so long. And wow, it has been the exact opposite for all 7 years. I actually would prefer that it get a little bit quiet at some point. But
Hold on,
um,
baby. Yeah.
every year has been crazy in its own way,
Oh,
because not only like what's been happening in our economy, we had the pandemic boom and bust in the housing market, but you look at the technology disruption in our industry, across mortgage and real estate and title and appraisal and valuation, and even into home building, with crazy 3D printing stuff that's happening over there. There's just nonstop disruption in addition to what's happening in our politics and in our economy, and it is anything but boring. And again, we keep circling back to this, but I just think it's so important to be smart about about our housing market, about our industry, about the companies that are in it, so you can kind of game out with your borrower, how the next couple of years might go. And the reality is, we still have great demographics in this country for a booming housing market. There are a lot of people who are forming households every year. I think, Audrey, you mentioned, 1.9 million a year. But you look at this particular demographic patch of millennials, and going into Gen Z, there's just a lot of people who are going to be buying homes or who are going to want to buy homes.
mhm.
And we're going to have to get creative to connect them with those homes.
I have pointed this out before, but I have a lifelong friend who lives on the East Coast. And, we talk once a year, maybe twice a year. And after like 20 years of me being in this business, and I've been in it for 10,000 years at this point, she pointed out that every time she had ever asked me that question, ever, the word I had used was crazy to
Mhm.
describe ever. And this was like dating back to the late 80s, right? So it has never changed. It's very consistent. And I just think it's I love our business so much. I love it. That's why I do this every week. I freaking love what we do. And I would like to refocus. I mean, there's so much talk about, oh, tech will take over. And oh, you listen to these C-suite guys and like, you don't need to take a loan app. The computer program can do that. Like all of these people who don't have a clue what the borrower's going
Yep.
through, they're giving advice. And I'm like, we need to blend the tech, which I think can be great, with the human and find some sort of happy medium, which we suck at as a society. So there is no happy medium. So you're either like all tech or all human. No, 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 people, somewhere in the middle, and find some sweet spot where we can take care of the buyers and the homeowners and the people who should be homeowners, right? So,
Yeah, I actually think that this might be the industry where we find that happy balance between humans and technology, right? So the technology supports the humans in being better advisors and
Mhm.
professional advisors. I think that there have been calls that tech was going to completely disrupt mortgage and real estate for 30 years or more, right? So there, for forever, forever, forever. But what does the transaction look like still? And what will it look like probably forever? You've got a trusted advisor that is your real estate professional, and you've got a trusted advisor that is your mortgage professional.
Yeah.
And wow, how amazing is that to have two great advisors on the most important transaction that you're going to do, probably. And I just I don't see that changing. I think that it's just too big and important and hairy of a transaction to trust to tech alone. Now, I think there can be some really powerful tech to help smooth out what is a real ridiculously laborious and paper intensive process still, right? Like I don't need to be going to some office for 4 hours for a closing, right? Like a lot of that can be done online and made much more seamless. There's a lot of too much staring and comparing and and a lot of stuff that tech can help with, but at the end of the day, like, setting up those two trusted advisors to do right by the home buyer or the home seller, that's the way. I think that's the way.
Well, and I agree that like you can do, I mean, obviously we've gone to mobile notaries and there's a lot of that that's happening that way. And we have the online notary, et cetera. But some of my best moments with my clients and the cementing of a relationship is when we're all together when they're signing their loan docs. And I'm saying, remember when I told you your rate was X? There it is. That's where it says it in writing. Remember when I said there was no prepay? That's where it says it. And by the way, do you have any questions? And, right? So there is so much to, like again, Kevin and I have been talking about the blending of the old school and the new way of doing things and how do we find that sweet spot? I wanted to take a moment and mention because I had an interesting conversation with a very smart friend of mine the other day who had spoken to Fannie and Freddie. And here is a little tip for you. Don't put your borrower's property that they're when you're writing pre-qual letters, don't put the property address on the letter. And the reason was it opens you up to litigation per Fannie and Freddie because you've pre-qualified the borrower, but you haven't pre-qualified the property. So you can't say, I'm going to lend on that property address. So I thought that was interesting. And the next pre-quals I had to write were for an investor. And they were like, I'm fine with that. You don't have to put the address on there because I'd been putting the address on forever. So just a little note to think about if you're, making a list of things that'll keep you out of court. That might be one of them. And
Well,
anyway,
we could do like the banks do and just not put any reason why we would approve a loan in the first place on the approval letter. I just read all the reasons why we will deny the loan. And that's how the banks do it.
yeah, Kevin's theory is that we're looking for a reason to approve a loan and the banks are looking for a reason not to approve a loan. So there's something to that. Hey, I just wanted to quickly talk about, our favorite regulator, the CFPB. We have Jonathan McKernan as the nominee. I read his testimony to Congress. If we were just going straight off of that, I would feel pretty good about him. I also heard our previous director, Rohit Chopra, on some news show post being fired. And he said, which pissed me off to no end, at its core, the CFPB is a law enforcement agency. And I'm like, what? I mean, it's supposed to be a consumer protection agency is what I thought. Why the hell would he say that? Ugh.
Yeah, he's not helping the cause at the CFPB, and it's really unfortunate because and I think the nominee looks like a good regulator. Like he looks like he seems like he could do a good job. But I think
I see, but previously, and it sounded like he did some good things there.
Yeah, no, I think he seems really solid. But the issue is, and Rohit Chopra is not helping this cause. There are a lot of people that just want to see the agency deleted, right? I think that sort of feels good and sounds good on its surface, but it's just important to think about what happened during Trump's first term when I think the CFPB at times was more neutered than it has been over the past 4 years. And it's not like the regulation just went away. But what happened was you saw, 20 to 25 blue states step in and then deliver a patchwork of regulation, which,
Yep.
maybe that's okay if you're just a single state lender. I think it's probably still complicated, but if you're a multi-state lender, wow, that seems much more complicated to me to have multiple state agencies of varying levels of, enforcement and desire to, to kind of make examples of people. Like you have all those folks weighing in now, whereas before,
Yep.
it's just one agency on a national level. It seems better to me to have a national standard and set of guidelines rather than the patchwork. And so I I have not been
We have
celebrating.
been preaching that from the mountains.
Yeah.
We see it because like our company is, pretty much in all states. And
New York, Diego.
where,
New
like,
York.
and a good example is Washington State requires that the NMLS number be adjacent to the number of the loan or the name of the loan officer, either right next to it or right below it. Now, most states don't require that, but because our company is licensed in that state, all loan officers for the company, no matter what state they practice in and what license they're licensed in, all have to have their name and NMLS number adjacent to each other. And it's like, well, that's, one state can kind of try everything else. And it's a simple little thing like that, but there's lots of little things that each state seems to be doing. And then it's like, well, what if one state does it? Then is that the highest and best standards that everyone else has to follow?
You also have to think about the politics of it, right? Like you have politicians in a lot of these blue states who are going to want to make a name for themselves in the Democratic Party and with progressives over the next 4 years. And what better way to do that than like be really aggressive with financial enforcement at the state level. And so like the incentives are just not favorable, I think, to a sort of smooth order of business approach. And this is not to say that I agree with regulation by enforcement, which has been happening way too much over the past 4 years, way too much. But I think there's got to be a better balance between what's been happening over the past 4 years and then just like getting rid of this national agency.
My understanding is that there were more enforcement actions under Kathy Kraninger than there were under Rohit Chopra.
Oh, that's interesting.
It was really interesting. And so again, the idea that you need it one way or the other, to your point, moderation, in my opinion, is better. And when you have a super aggressive regulator, it drives the cost up for the consumer too. But if you have no consumer protection for the consumer, that's a problem. So again, like something in the middle, people, it's unreal.
Middle is best.
What?
Middle is best. The,
Yeah.
the middle usually is having to compromise on something between two opposing positions frequently will lead you to a very good solution. Yeah, no, I hope to see a lot more compromise coming out of DC and of the states. I think it's just really good. It's really good for us to be trying to compromise.
Well, if so many of us want compromise and moderation, then why are we on these extremes all the time is my question. So anyway, well, something to aspire to for sure. And with that, we are at the top of the hour. That went fast. That's always a sign of a good show, Diego.
That was great. I really enjoyed it.
So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your insights and we'll look forward to seeing you again.
And thanks to everyone for their comments. They were kind of blowing us up today. We couldn't get to all of them, but wow.
Curious. It was awesome. We love it. So anyway, have a wonderful week, people. And remember that we need to provide housing and solutions for our borrowers. So whatever the rates are today or tomorrow, they need a place everyone needs a place to live. So go get a loan, go do a loan. There are so many options. It's awesome these days. So go be busy doing loans. Bye guys. Have a great week.